Hello, my friends. Welcome to my show for drummers only. And as I promised, today we're going to talk about Ringo. It should be fun. Also known as Sir Richard Starkey, he was born in 1940 in Liverpool. The Beatles gave him one song per album. These were With a Little Help from My Friends, Yellow Submarine, Good Night, Act Naturally, Don't Pass Me By, and Octopus's Garden. Oh, and he also played drums. As a child, he was in the hospital often, childhood ailments, some of them life-threatening. He worked on the railroad for a bit. No, not Thomas the Tank Engine. He liked the skiffle craze. He was a big fan. He formed a band in '57 called the Eddie Clayton Skiffle Group. The skiffle fad died down when American rock and roll supplanted it. Starr was drummer for Rory Storm and the Hurricanes prior to the Beatles. The Hurricanes played at the Cavern Club, which was a problem because the Cavern Club patrons at that time wanted jazz. They threw copper coins at the band when they played Whole Lotta Shakin' Going On, it's a Jerry Lee Lewis song. The Hurricanes had much more success when they shared a bill with Gene Vincent. Starr sang Boys by the Shirelles. They went off to Hamburg. Derry and the Seniors had been successful there, but Storm was committed to a different gig, so the Beatles with Pete West went in their place. The Hurricanes showed up after their summer gig at Butlins to replace Derry and the Seniors at the Kaiser Keller. The Hurricanes played 6 90-minute sets every day, alternating with the Beatles. Ringo, as he was now known due to the Ringsy War, accompanied John, Paul, and George to a small recording studio to make a demo. Pete Best was not around, so Ringo filled in. 3 songs were recorded: Fever, September Song, and Summertime. This was the first recording of Ringo with the Beatles. Unfortunately, the recordings were lost. Unless they've turned up recently. You never know. Ringo considered leaving the Hurricanes but to join Derry and the Seniors, but he accepted a job with Tony Sheridan at the Top 10 Club in Liverpool. Pete Best fell ill. He couldn't make the gig at the Cavern Club, which was now okay with rock and roll acts. Quick turnover there. Ringo sat in for the Beatles for a lunchtime show, and that night at the Kingsway Club in Southport. Ringo was at Butlin's camp when Lennon and McCartney asked him to replace Pete Best. Starr accepted at 25 pounds per week, which is the equivalent of 500 pounds in 2019. Best was offered to the Hurricanes, but Pete wasn't keen, and Rory was pissed. It was 1962. The Beatles gig with Ringo lasted only 8 years. Ringo had a successful career on his own after the Beatles with hits like It Don't Come Easy, Photograph, You're 16, Back Off Boogaloo. In '73, the album Ringo was top 10 in the US and the UK. Now was when he narrated Thomas and Friends on PBS for their show Shining Time Station. Sure, check that out. Since 1989, Starr was toured with 11 variations of his all-star band. Ringo has been inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, one of 21 musicians to do that. As a child, Richard had appendicitis, peritonitis, and later tuberculosis, for which he spent 2 years in a sanitarium. To relieve boredom, patients were encouraged to join the hospital band. Ringo's first drum was a piece of furniture next to his bed. Upon his release, his mom, who had misplaced Richard's father somewhere, was now engaged to a man named Harry Graves, who would become Richie's stepfather. And he was also a terrific stepfather. Harry introduced Richie to big band music. All was not well at home, though. The family lived in the Dingle, the poorest section of Liverpool. The air was poor because the tiny houses were fueled by coal and were ramshackle at best. Life is funny. This sickly semi-literate who never finished school would become the richest drummer on the planet. Can you imagine him raking a thimble across a washboard in his skiffle group? Why not? For Christmas 1957, his stepdad gave Richie a second-hand drum kit with a snare drum, a bass drum, and a cymbal made from an ash can lid. They may have been shoddy, but these drums enabled the Eddie Clayton Skiffle Band to book local gigs before the skiffle fad slowed down the next year, and Richard got valuable experience playing in public. When Ringo first replaced Pete Best with the Beatles, the fans were not happy. They held vigils outside Ringo's house chanting, "Pete forever, Ringo never." And a girl gave George Harrison a black eye, and Brian Epstein had his tires flattened. Later, Ringo was temporarily replaced by Alan White on the Beatles' first single, "Love Me Do." It was backed with "P.S. I Love You." Starr was handed a tambourine and maracas at the session. George Martin, who had made the decision, said he was taking no chances. By November of '62, Ringo had been accepted by the Beatles fans, and he got as much fan mail as the other three combined. After the Beatles were on the Ed Sullivan Show in the States, life would never be the same for the lovable Mop Tops. Life would change for all of youth culture as well. Ringo received critical praise for his acting on A Hard Day's Night, and the movie Help centered on Ringo's character. Not for nothing, Ringo was the first Beatle to smoke marijuana when Bob Dylan first met the band and offered. John, Paul, and George declined, but saw Ringo's features soften, and soon it was a Beatles thing, and not long after, it was an everyone thing. At the peak of Beatlemania, Ringo took to mounting his cymbals vertically after receiving death threats in Montreal. In the recording studio, Ringo was feeling left out when the others created. And live, the Beatles would play in larger venues, but the PA equipment was still primitive, and the music, including Ringo's drums, were drowned out by the cacophony of screams. This is why the Beatles stopped touring in '66, and this is why Paul created Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band to send out into the world as substitutes. And this is why the rumors of Paul dying in a car accident were supported by clues that were discovered on sleeve art and hidden in the tracks. It was thought that a McCartney look-alike named Jimmy Shears, so Jimmy Campbell, took over Paul's work and was talented enough to pull it off. Do I believe this? I believe that it was possible, but unlikely. Surely the truth would have come out by now, wouldn't it? I'll tell you one thing, after the death of John and later George, that leaves Ringo as the last witness to the truth. And Ringo, in his 70s, is looking healthy. Healthier than Paul, if you ask me. God bless him. The sickly kid is the healthiest Beatle in the end. Even if his weak stomach couldn't handle the Indian cooking in Rishikesh, this was when the relationship with the others began to deteriorate. An argument with Macca resulted in Ringo's quitting the band during the White Album's recording sessions. He returned in 2 weeks, the Let It Be film, and recording the album. John quit the band. The demise of the Beatles would not be made public for almost a year. For another 50 years, Starr has continued his music career. 50 years. He has worked with a score of top musicians, including George Harrison, and separately with Paul McCartney, and for John Lennon's Plastic Ono Band. He put out several albums, Sentimental Journey followed by Boucoups of Blues. These were met with favorable reviews, but not much sales. Starr turned to film acting. He also directed Born to Boogie with Mark Bolan and T-Rex in 1972. John, George, and Paul all contributed separately to Ringo's next LP, and here are the songs. 1, I'm the Greatest. This was a Lennon number. 2, Have You Seen My Baby by Randy Newman. 3, Photograph by Ringo and George. 4, Sunshine Life for Me, Sail Away Raymond. It's a George Harrison number. You're 16, covered Bobby and Dickie Sherman. 6, Oh My My. This is Ringo and Vinnie Poncia, a guy that was involved with the whole disco craze. 7, Step Lightly, Ringo. 8, 6 O'Clock by Paul and Linda McCartney. That's what they had to offer. 9, Devil Woman with Ringo and Poncia. And 10, You and Me Babe, Harrison and Mal Evans. And it finishes up with It Don't Come Easy by Ringo Starr. And today, Ringo Starr is sober, healthy, and keeps on going. Now, Ringo is left-handed, but he played drums right-handed. He said, I'm your basic offbeat drummer with funny fills. I can't roll around the drums. He has tremendous feel and tempo. Starr didn't believe in interpreting songs. He said, I am the foundation, and then I put a bit of glow here and there. If there's a gap, I want it to be good enough to fill it. In 2011, he was voted 15th greatest drummer of all time. His virtuosity inspired countless drum students to persevere more than anyone before or since. If you remove Ringo's drum tracks from any Beatles song, and you don't have the Beatles sound, but if you take away any one of those tracks and play it without the other Beatle parts, you can, in fact, identify the song. Ringo's favorite drummer was Jim Keltner. Starr also influenced Phil Collins, who felt that Ringo was underrated, that his style is difficult to reproduce. Ringo used a matched grip on his sticks, copied by heavy metal drummers to achieve more power. Ringo also tuned his heads lower, creating a fat sound. More than any other, Ringo put the drummer on an equal basis with the band. What John Entwistle did for the bass, Ringo did for the drum set. Yes, Ringo is truly a star. Let's talk about A Hard Day's Night and Tomorrow Never Knows. These were phrases became known as Ringoisms. And I understand there were quite a few more of those. I'll have to pick that up somewhere else. Maybe if I do another Beatle. And it's funny, if you try to do a Beatle YouTube show, the algorithms pick it up immediately. It's amazing. Anyway, thanks again for being with me for Drummers Only. I'm East Coast Pete, and I'll be back just as soon as I can. See y'all.